been dealing with.
Wait, Tiff, what are you saying?
Even though we've been dealing with this issue for a really long time, we're not the only ones dealing with sewage issues in our city and in our waterways. So that was just kind of like an interesting reminder for me coming off of this retreat out in Pittsburgh. So thanks, Liana, for the great introduction. Blue Water Baltimore has been working on the city's consent decree issues for a long time now. And for those of you that don't know, Blue Water Baltimore is a plaintiff intervener in the modified consent decree for sewage overflows. And so what that means is that we had a legal seat at the table when it came to developing the legal remedy or like the legal agreement to stop sewage overflows into our local waterways. But before I get too much into like the legal piece of it and where we are now, we should talk about like where we came from, where this all started. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you, Liana. So this is a picture of Baltimore's regional sanitary sewer system. And we make a point to say that this is the regional sanitary sewer system because even though the pipes are independently owned and operated by the municipalities in which, so like Baltimore City or Baltimore County, in which they physically reside, the system is connected. And so those pipes, largely gravity fed, gravity driven, just meaning that like the poop inside flows downhill. Honestly, the water flows downhill. Those pipes don't know really the difference between the city county line. And so what's happening upstream or up pipe system in this case is inherently affecting what's happening downstream. And it's also like a really interesting setup because as you can see in this picture, we have denoted the Back River wastewater treatment plant over in the Back River, next to the Back River. And then we have the Patapsco plant, which is right on the Patapsco River. And so those wastewater treatment plants have those namesakes because of the rivers that they're right next to. So they are at the lowest point in the landscape. So everything just flows down, gets flushed and flows down and gets treated at one of those two wastewater treatment plants. And, in our case, a lot of the sewage collection in the Back River sewer shed starts in the county, it flows through the city, and then it goes back into the county to be treated by a city-owned wastewater treatment plant that then gets discharged into county waterways. So there's already a lot of mixing of responsibilities, and there's already a lot of intermingling and a lot of negotiations and agreements that have to happen. So it's about time that we started treating this system as the regional entity it really is. But what this picture shows you is the sewer lines. It's an artistic rendering, so it's not exactly precise. But these are the sewer lines that are flowing across the county and the city. This is a cross-section image of what those pipes look like underground. And so to talk about the phase 2 plan, why we're here today, how we got here, where we are, and what you can do to impact where we go next, we really have to talk about the current state of the pipes under our feet every single day. And so this image shows the 3-pipe system that the Baltimore region currently has. And so these are the pipes that we have within, it's got a fancy name, it's called the URDL, the Urban Rural Demarcation Line. You might have heard a lot about that recently in the news. I know that the Sun and the Banner have been doing some stories about the URDL lines in the county. But basically, this is like our water systems that we have. So we have our drinking water supply, which is a pressurized system that brings
likely to get worse this
so we have drinking water that starts in our reservoirs out in the counties. And then that drinking water is treated and services neighborhoods in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. That system is pressurized. And so what that means is that even though we get a lot of water main breaks in Baltimore, especially around this time of year when we get those rapid freezing and then thawing cycles that are really, really hard on those underground pipes, even when we get a water main break, the water like explodes out of those pipes because it's highly pressurized. And so for the most part, unless something goes really wrong and the system loses pressurization, mostly that drinking water supply is it's sort of siloed from the other pipes, and we don't worry about it as much. It doesn't have as many of the deficiencies that we see in the other 2 sets of pipes. So the other 2 sets of pipes, unfortunately, are riddled with deficiencies. The Baltimore City DPW and Baltimore County DPWT are working very hard and have put a lot of money into fixing. So this first set of pipes that you see here, the kind of like beige pipe, that is the stormwater system. And so when rain hits our roads, when rain hits our streets, it goes into the curb drains that are along the street. And it's basically like a high-speed highway from street to stream. So the rainwater goes into those curb drains and it goes right out into the nearest stream through a stormwater outfall. And that's what you're seeing sort of like towards the bottom of the screen. There's like you can see the circle and the water flowing out of that beige pipe. That is stormwater just exiting the system, the municipal separated stormwater sewer system, or MS4, directly into our nearest stream. So that system is really only supposed to carry rainwater, or in emergencies, it can carry like firefighting liquid. So like the water that they use to put out fires. And it's really not supposed to have anything else. It often does have other things, but this presentation is about the sanitary sewer system, not the MS4. So I'm not going to get too much into what other pollutants that system can carry. But in theory, that system is from rain to the drain to the stream. And then the other set of pipes we have here is the sanitary sewer system. So the difference between, a lot of people in this room have probably heard this joke before, sorry, but for those who haven't, the difference between the sanitary sewer system and the stormwater sewer system is that the sanitary sewer system is only supposed to carry the fluid, the flushed or drained stuff that comes from your house or from an industrial facility. And so even though both of those pipes have the word sewer in it, think about it like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? So like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lived in a sewer, but they lived in a stormwater sewer, not the sanitary sewer. Because if that had been the case, it would have been a much different cartoon. We wouldn't have been able to watch that when we were kids. So both of them are sewers. That just means a conveyance for liquids. But the sanitary sewer system is really the one that we're talking about today. And it's the set of pipes that takes liquid and fluids from your house to the wastewater treatment plant. So everything in that system of pipes, it can be dangerous. It can be hazardous materials from an industrial facility or from stuff that gets flushed that shouldn't. And it also carries very high bacteria levels because it's human sewage being discharged into those pipes. It's all supposed to go to a wastewater treatment plant, get scrubbed clean, and then that liquid gets discharged back out into our rivers, which was kind of like mind-blowing for me the very first time I realized that sewage, once it's cleaned at the wastewater treatment plant, goes back out into our rivers. It seems like obvious once you have done this work for a while, or once you hear that, it's like, well, yeah, of course, where else would, over 200 million gallons of water per day, where would it go? But it does go into the wastewater treatment plants, and then it gets discharged back out into the rivers. So in theory, we have these three pipes. They're all chugging along. They're all doing their own thing. We're all happy. But in practice, the stormwater system and the sanitary sewer system, so the beige and the red pipes, they are old, they are leaking. A lot of these pipes haven't been properly maintained over time. And that is not just a problem from like the current administration or the past 10 or 20 years. This is the result of really like the can getting kicked down the road for decades, like over 100 years. And so when these pipes start to develop cracks in them, when they start getting leaky, or even when somebody, installed a pipe backwards, if it's laid in the ground the wrong way, what ends up happening is that the fluids, the liquid inside each of these pipes starts to intermingle. And what that results in is sewage overflows. So we've either got a dry weather sewage overflow, and that happens when sewage from the red pipe gets into the beige pipe by accident, and it gets discharged out into our streams. That can happen rain or shine. There can be an illegal connection. So sometimes people intentionally put the red pipe into the yellow pipe. Sometimes that happens by accident too. But long story short, we're getting sewage into our local waterways by accident. The other way that this happens is that rainwater can get into our sanitary sewer system. And that's when we get these big, explosive million-gallon sewage events that are discharging into our local waterways. So we have some problems. We have some issues to deal with. We have these cracked and leaky pipes. Also, these pipes are, it's the end of the line for a lot of different households, thousands of households, a lot of different industrial facilities that have pre-treatment permits, all of the restaurants that are supposed to be maintaining their grease traps. All of these facilities are ultimately discharging into the same set of pipes. So there's different levels of protection, different permits, so that we can like clean up what's supposed to be going into the pipes in the beginning. But at the end of the day, it all ends up in the same place. And so because of that, because of people flushing things that shouldn't be flushed, because of non-compliance with pre-treatment permits, these pipes can also get clogged up. So fats, oils, and grease can clog the pipes. Root infiltration from trees can clog the pipes. That happens when a pipe is already starting to show its age and already starting to crack. And then the tree roots kind of like find the path of least resistance to water. So there's a lot of different ways that these pipes are being negatively impacted by their surroundings. I think one of the other big issues that we didn't yet talk about is structured overflows. And sorry, I know I'm like busting through this. I'm going really, really quickly because I want to give as much time as possible for questions on what you can do in the plan. But we have structured overflows in the sanitary sewer system that were designed in the system from the beginning, really to prevent sewage backups from happening into people's houses. So a structured overflow point is, there's one still in use. There's a couple still in use. There's 4 that I know of in Baltimore City, and then a few more in Baltimore County. But there's one right across from like 1901 Falls Road, which is along the Jones Falls Trail down in the Mill Valley. There is like a hole, there's an outfall coming out of a pipe system that looks just like a stormwater outfall, but instead of going into the stormwater pipes, it actually leads into the sanitary sewer pipes. And so these are kind of like emergency escape hatches that were designed into the system so that when a collapsed pipe or a clog causes sewage to start backing up in the system in the wrong direction, instead of going all the way up into somebody's house, it gets discharged into the stream. So we still have these kind of like legacy overflow points that are not supposed to be there according to the Clean Water Act, because that constitutes an illicit discharge of sewage into our local waterways. So again, because of all of these deficiencies, because of the issues, and because of the pipes just physically being too small to carry as much sewage plus stormwater as they currently do because of like the infiltration and inflow, we're getting overflows into our local streams and the Baltimore Harbor, and we are getting sewage backups into local homes. So a couple of years ago, we worked with some researchers at Johns Hopkins University, and they found that statistically speaking, if in Baltimore, if you live in a neighborhood that has a higher percentage of Black residents, you are more likely to experience a sewage backup into your home. And that's like statistically significant. And that's really just a different way of saying that Black people are experiencing more sewage backups in Baltimore than white people or any other race. So that is like a very clear-cut environmental justice issue and a major problem that needs to be rectified. So these overflows that are happening into our streams and harbor, they're discharging contaminants, but also heavy bacteria loads so that we're not achieving water quality standards. Water quality standards is like regulatory language. It's basically like the legal threshold for a healthy waterway that's able to sustain fishing and other uses for people. And so we are not currently meeting some of those thresholds, in part because of these overflows into our streams and harbor. So let's move down to the next slide. Okay, so we have a system. In the beginning, there were pipes. Then there were problems. Then we had a solution. So in 2002, the EPA, Maryland Department of the Environment, Department of Justice came together, and Baltimore City came together and said, we need a plan. It's not enough just to say, okay, stop discharging sewage into our local waterways. We need a systemic plan to get back on track and to stop these sewage overflows from happening in a way that creates a more vibrant and sustainable and resilient Baltimore. It wasn't just Baltimore. So Baltimore wasn't just singled out in 2002. This was actually part of a coordinated effort to bring a lot of different cities into consent decrees, to bring them into compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act, and to stop sewage discharges from negatively impacting our local waterways. So in 2002, which was, hold on, I had to do some math, 23 years ago, we entered into a legally binding agreement with these agencies to say, okay, it doesn't make any sense just to pay a whole bunch of money. There was a penalty involved, but it doesn't just make sense to pay a bunch of money. We need a plan that we all agree to, that we can be held accountable to get us out of this mess. So in 2002, there was a whole list of projects developed to say, okay, thing number one that we need to do to stop sewage overflows figure out what the pipe system under our feet actually looks like. So one of the biggest projects that happened after the 2002 consent decree was signed was just a comprehensive evaluation of the current status of the pipes under our feet. We know that they're old, we know they're leaking, we know that some of these pipes are ancient, but we don't really know what shape they're in, and we don't know exactly where all of those pipes are. Honestly, we didn't even know at that time where all of the structured overflow points were engineered into the system. We were actually able to find one of those structured overflow points. Blue Water Baltimore was able to help DPW find a structured overflow point based on one of our outfall screening blitz, sewage blitz events that we do, which is really exciting. So the original deadline for that legally binding agreement to stop sewage overflows was in 2016. As we started approaching 2016, the agencies and Baltimore City and Blue Water Baltimore all realized that we were not going to stop sewage overflows by the deadline. And that was due in part because the city identified this big hydraulic restriction, or like a big major problem that they didn't previously know existed near the Back River wastewater treatment plant that was causing a lot of sewage backups under the city of Baltimore, and then subsequently into our streams, harbor, and into people's homes. So instead of just throwing our hands up and saying, well, I guess we didn't make the deadline, oh well, that agreement had to be renegotiated, it had to be modified. So in the course of renegotiating and modifying that agreement, Blue Water Baltimore formally intervened, and then we had a seat at the table to figure out what the next iteration of the agreement looks like. Like, how are we going to improve it? How are we going to deal with things like sewage backups into people's homes, which previously wasn't dealt with at all in the consent decree? But because of our intervention, we have a stronger, more transparent agreement today than we did back in 2002. And so that's what happened in 2017. We signed the agreement. The new deadline for all projects to be finished, like finished with sewage overflows, was 2032. Which honestly at the time felt so far away. And now I'm realizing is only 7 years away, which is wild to think about. So all of the like actual capital projects are supposed to be finished by 2030, which is only 5 years away. And then there's like a 2-year look back period after that to make sure that like after post-construction, they can monitor all the flows from the pipes and they can say, yes, we ended all sewage overflows according to these established levels of protection, which is like, okay, we acknowledge that if we get another superstorm Sandy, there might be sewage overflows. Or if we get another tropical storm Lee, there might be sewage overflows. But for like a typical like weather event based on, okay, like, is this a daycare that we're talking about? Or is this a church we're talking about? We're going to provide a specific level of protection for those areas. And so there's reasonable limits to like how we're going to end sewage overflow. So nobody is saying, okay, a drop of sewage can never enter these waterways again. What we are saying is people need to come first. People need to be protected. And the ecology of these waterways needs to be able to thrive and heal by not being assaulted by sewage overflows as consistently as they currently are. Okay, great. We have a deadline. We have projects. So the phase 1 of this new agreement basically outlined all the projects we knew about. It was, I want to say low-hanging fruit, but it still costs like hundreds of millions of dollars. We've already put billions of dollars into the system, but these are just like the projects we know we have to implement to get to the finish line. So that's all the phase 1 projects. And the deadline for those projects was 2021, 2022, depending on some of them. So 2021 came and went, and unfortunately, some of those big projects were not completed. So by 2020, by June of 2025, we have now completed all those phase 1 projects, but by the time of the deadline, we hadn't yet completed them. I think it's also worth noting that closing off some of those structured overflows that I talked about, that like the emergency escape hatches, some of those are still open because throughout the process of fixing the pipes that were supposed to lead to us being able to close off those points, we discovered new problems, new fun problems, and expensive problems. And so those structured overflows are still open. So during the course of all of this, Baltimore City issued their first iteration of the phase 2 plan. So phase 1 of the modified consent decree is, here's what we know we need to do. Phase two is supposed to be, okay, we don't know exactly what the state of overflows and what the situation is going to look like once we complete phase one. So we're going to wait, we're going to use adaptive management techniques and strategies so that we can then look back and say, okay, here's where we are after phase one. Now we can figure out what else is there left to do. How do we get to the established levels of protection? How do we eliminate sewage overflows after all of this time? So that's phase two. It's basically like what's left. The first iteration of the plan was issued in 2023, and it was later rejected by MDE. And so now, about like 2 years later, we have another version of the phase two plan. This is the plan that folks are now able to make comments on, public comments, until December 1st. And so this is the thing that we're going to be talking about today and learning a little bit about, what still needs to be done, and Blue Water Baltimore's commentary and concerns and recommended changes for phase two. I think one of the biggest things that people have really been focusing in on this phase two plan is that the extension of those project deadlines now goes out to 2046. So just looking at this timeline, you can see that the original deadline for completed projects was 2016. And then we shifted that deadline out to 2030, 2032 for a look back. And now we're looking at 2046 as the proposed deadline for these sewage overflow projects to be completed. And so if this plan is adopted by the agencies that are supposed to be regulating Baltimore City, if they say, yes, good to go, like, let's do it, then that will put us at a 44-year implementation timeline between the time that we agreed to the consent decree to the time when the projects are completed. So unfortunately, we have some concerns about the phase two plan. So I think, DPW, Baltimore City DPW has made incredible progress so far. They have eliminated a vast majority of the sewage overflows that are occurring into our local waterways. And that's great news, but there's still a ways to go. And unfortunately, the phase two plan as it currently stands doesn't adequately address a lot of our concerns. And so the purpose of Blue Water Baltimore commenting and holding this webinar is not to tear DPW down, but to strengthen the plan so that we get to the end of the tunnel quicker, with more accountability and transparency, in a way that protects public health and waterways, increases fairness and county accountability, because remember, this is a regional system, whether we like that word or not, and improves equity, affordability, and environmental justice. So I'm going to go through a series of, I think it's 6 different recommendations that we have to improve the phase two plan. And then I'm going to pause because I really hope that there's a lot of conversation and questions from folks about the plan, the consent decree process in general, how you can get involved. So these are the top 6 things that Blue Water Baltimore has identified within the phase two plan so far that can be improved upon. And we have a comment letter drafted that folks can sign on to, or you can submit your own comment letter that pulls out any one of these points that really resonate with you. So the first piece is about protecting public health and waterways. And so in DPW's phase two plan, there's a map and a chart within this plan, and it outlines all of the different areas, the sewer manholes that are known to be sewage overflow points. At this point in the process, like 23 years later, we have a pretty good idea of like the main offender sewage overflow manholes, right? So like which of these sewage overflow manholes are going to comply with the established level of protection for sewage overflows after phase two, and which ones are still going to violate that level of protection. And so it appears in the phase two plan that even after phase two projects are completed, there are still going to be specific sewer manholes that violate the established level of protection that was originally agreed upon in the consent decree. So I would love to be proven wrong about this one, not at this moment, but in the question and answer section, if there is anybody from DPW in attendance, or somebody who's also gone through the document with a fine tooth comb, I would love to have this conversation, because it seems unimaginable to me that the city is still identifying specific locations where we are not going to comply with the established agreement. And yet it seems like we're okay with that, because in order to comply, it might be really, really slow or really, really expensive. So again, Blue Water Baltimore's position here is that we need to hold zero tolerance for sewage overflows, particularly in sensitive areas. And again, when I talk about sensitive areas, I'm talking about things that are established in the agreement, the consent decree, things like hospitals and daycares and things like that. Also, DPW, I touched on this a little bit, but DPW is claiming that the remaining 6% or so of overflows that will still exist are too costly to fix quickly. And our position is that these projects really need to be accelerated and not defer them to the 2046 deadline. I think there's also confusion around how much sewage we have effectively eliminated through the course of these consent decree projects. DPW is stating that up to 83% of the sewage overflow volume has been eliminated based on these consent decree projects. And also that statistic is based on a baseline of sewage overflows beginning in the year 2018. And the reason why that's problematic is because 2018 was the rainiest year on record in the Baltimore region. We had about 72 inches of rain that year, when a more normal year is about like 46, 47 inches. And so setting the baseline during an extremely rainy year that resulted in significantly more sewage overflows than normal is problematic when we're trying to track overall progress. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so Blue Water Baltimore's next kind of like set of comments or next recommendation is around strengthening accountability and transparency. So a couple of times in this phase 2 plan, Baltimore City DPW is questioning the validity of the hydraulic model that they have been using for years to guide them around where these sewer projects need to go, where they need to be implemented. And the city is saying that their observed sewage overflows, so like what they're seeing on the ground, isn't matching up with the model predictions and like what the model is telling them they should be seeing. And so the response to that is, well, the model must be wrong, and the model is over predicting future sewage discharges. So we don't think that we should be bound to using the model predictions. And unfortunately, that's not convincing enough to us at this moment, because we don't have access to kind of like the model itself. We don't have access to all of the assumptions that are being put into the model to begin with. So for example, the hydraulic model, as far as we understand, is using precipitation data from 1991 to 2010 as sort of like its baseline. Like this is indicative, this is representative of typical rainfall in the Baltimore region. NOAA data from 1991 to 2010. But since the consent decree was agreed to, NOAA has actually come out with a new set of climate data, climate norms beyond 2010 that should be used to update the model, because this time frame, 1991 to 2010, it doesn't take into account a bunch of the really big, thanks, Leon. It doesn't take, Leona just said in the chat, NOAA is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So this time frame doesn't take into account big rain events that hit Baltimore really hard. Things like I already said, Superstorm Sandy, Tropical Storm Lee, but also like some of the big unnamed storms. So I don't know if anybody remembers, but back in, I think it was 2014, we had like that big 6-inch rain event that collapsed the CSX line. In 2018, we had several major rain events that triggered historic sewage overflows. Flooding in the Frederick Road corridor, and also in Ellicott City, flooding in 2016. So anyway, long story short, we have better data to update the model with, and we should be using that data. And we also just shouldn't say, okay, well, we're going to throw the model out the window because it's not matching up with what we're seeing on the ground, because sewage overflows, we know, are chronically underreported. So especially in a situation where we are slowly but surely fixing the pipes under our feet, those sewage overflows can get diverted to other locations. And so if we're having sewage overflows in places like the woods of Armistead Gardens, right? Like we may not actually have eyes on them. We may not be accurately keeping track of them, even if they are occurring more frequently than they did previously. So these sewage overflows and backups, they're chronically underreported. We know that that's not the full story. So we shouldn't take those observations as canon over the model predictions. I think I hit everything here. Yeah. Okay, so Blue Water's next set of recommendations is about equity, affordability, and environmental justice. And so I mentioned earlier that Black residents in Baltimore are disproportionately experiencing sewage backups into their homes. And low-income residents are disproportionately feeling that, that burden, that economic burden. So one of the things that I'm really proud of that Blue Water Baltimore was a part of was establishing a response from the city on sewage backups. So prior to 2017, prior to the modified consent decree, there was no public assistance program for folks who are experiencing sewage backups. But now, in part because of Blue Water's work, and also in collaboration with our partners at Clean Water Action and Environmental Integrity Project, and also like other folks who submitted comments to this effect, the modified consent decree established the expedited reimbursement program for sewage backups. So that was like a step in the right direction to get people the help they needed when they were experiencing sewage backups through no fault of their own. There's a lot of restrictions on that program. It wasn't perfect. It really wasn't advertised and it wasn't utilized, and people were being denied from that program. So back in, I want to say 2021, but I might get the date wrong, Baltimore City voluntarily established a different program, a direct assistance program called SOS, or Sewage On-Site Support Program. And with this program, instead of reimbursing people for the out-of-pocket expenses of dealing with a sewage backup in their home, which is really, really expensive, Baltimore City will actually dispatch a cleaning crew, cleaning and disinfection, to your house, but only if that sewage backup follows the very strict qualification criteria that they have established. And so again, this only helps people with verified wet weather sewage backups. At first, it was based on capacity restrictions. Now I think that that restriction has been loosened a bit. But at the end of the day, people still aren't getting the help that they need when they're experiencing a sewage backup that's caused in part or in full by a condition in the city-owned portion of the system. I know that was like very carefully selected language that I just used. But that's because at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to semantics when we're talking about like what's covered, what's not. We have to be very particular about how we talk about it. So anyway, one of our comments is that this new phase 2 of the plan, like the next iteration of where are we going to put piped projects next? What's next on the list? Where are we going to get people help? Well, that should be informed by where sewage backups are happening, because we all know that sewage overflows into the street and ultimately into our streams are terrible. But people are being really heavily impacted by sewage backups into their houses that aren't considered the same as a sewage overflow simply because they're not entering a local waterway. And so our position is that those sewage backups should be included in the prioritization of where these new pipe projects start. If we don't do that, if we just say, okay, well, a backup isn't the same as if a backup isn't the same as an overflow, and so we're not going to consider it in the prioritization of where these next generation of pipe projects go, well, then we basically created sacrifice zones. And we've said, okay, well, the area where people are experiencing sewage backups, that's basically like a holding tank. It's an unofficial holding tank for the sewage overflow problems that we're experiencing in the city. And that's not good enough. And so we're saying that needs to be part of the prioritization. And not only that, but Baltimore should be using its own data set to figure out where backups are happening. So there's already like a categorization that folks use when they're reporting a sewage backup to 311. And that data set should be used to inform the next generation of projects. Next, increase fairness and county accountability. So again, we said at the very top of this presentation, whether we like it or not, this is a regional system and it's time that we started acting like it. And so our position here is that Baltimore City is using this hydraulic model to identify where projects should go and how effective projects have been at stopping sewage overflows. The thing that we didn't really talk about is the fact that Baltimore County has a sewage consent decree as well. So in 2002, Baltimore City entered its decree. In 2005, Baltimore County entered into its sewage consent decree. Unfortunately, Baltimore County also has incomplete work under their consent decree. So they've gone past the established deadlines for completing their consent decree. And the model, the hydraulic model that they are using to figure out the pipe projects that they're going to put in the ground may not be the same hydraulic model that the city uses. It's unclear if there is one unified hydraulic model being used for the entire region, but it appears that there may be different models being used. And if we're trying to look for holistic, systemic solutions that work for everybody within the watershed and sewer shed, regardless of who owns or operates the pipes, we need one model that's telling us where the pipes need to be fixed first. We also need to establish adequate cost sharing so that ultimately the city doesn't end up subsidizing problems that are still happening in the county. Because of the way that the systems are like juxtaposed, because of the way that they are laid out, like if the city, or sorry, if the county in theory is sending too much sewage plus stormwater, so like if they haven't like gotten a handle on their infiltration and inflow problems up in the county, like if there's like too much coming in to the city side, the city will not comply with its own consent decree because they're dealing with everything that comes in from the top. I think where this most often shows up is just the lack of information sharing. And so in the phase 2 plan, the city does say that recently they have established a much better working relationship with the county, an information sharing relationship. So we have a better idea of what's coming into the city from the county side. But really, like this system needs to work collaboratively long term in order to stop sewage overflows and keep them stopped. And then the final recommendation, which really is like the number one big overarching recommendation, but to bring it all home, we need to maintain the 2030 deadline for construction project completion, unless this whole agreement is formally modified through a transparent public process. So shifting the goalposts from 2030 out to 2046 feels, I mean, honestly, it was a shock when I read that. And I'm in this all the time. Felt like a shock, but also it might be what's necessary. I'm not here to say that a 2046 extension is unreasonable. I'm not here to say that we have to maintain that original deadline no matter what. What I am here to say is that MDE and EPA should not be able to just carte blanche say yes to a 16-year extension without a robust public input process. And that probably looks like remodifying the consent decree, honestly, because we believe that this constitutes a major modification. And so this plan should not be approved by the agencies without more conversation, more public input, and really more accountability and transparency. Okay, so that brings us to what can you do to help? So I've just talked a lot about Blue Water Baltimore's position on some major key components of the phase 2 plan of the modified consent decree. And we've established an action alert that folks can sign on to or send a letter to MDE, EPA, and DPW. And it outlines everything I just talked about. So I would also really heavily encourage folks on this call and beyond to not just send the pre-formatted letter. Like those are the key bullet points that we've pulled out. But these agencies and the city, like they really need to hear from you about how you are impacted by where these projects go, and what you think about the extended timeline, what you think about, whether or not it's financially worth it to stop sewage overflows as quickly as possible. Another thing that you can do is share this presentation with your network or our text explainer that we'll be sending out as well. We're going to be posting this up on YouTube. So this is a shareable webinar that folks can tune into to make sure that they understand the situation. And then the last thing is that you can sign up to receive updates and future action alerts by signing up for our Blue Water Baltimore's newsletter. So with that, I am going to take questions and hear some comments, and I'll pass it back to you, Leona, really quickly, just for facilitation. Oh, you're on mute.
Good. Thanks, Alice. I always learn something from you, and I hope other folks did too. We do have a couple questions that I was not able to answer. Um, so what Ken says, what leaks out of sewage networks depends on how much water leaks in. Seems like a lot of the work would be in inflow and infiltration studies and sewer lining. Have these rehabs been given enough emphasis?
Oh, I think that is an excellent comment for DPW on the phase two plan. So you're absolutely right that our sewer systems, the stormwater sewer system and the sanitary sewer system, are intrinsically connected. Whether no matter how much we want them to be separated, and no matter how much they're supposed to be separated, a big component of stopping I&I inflow and infiltration, in my opinion, is increasing green stormwater infrastructure upstream and stopping the problem at its source. So I think that, yeah, like codifying the need for more green stormwater infrastructure, codifying the need for creating spongier cities and watersheds is an excellent comment to make.
Ken also asks if you can talk about the barriers to getting the city and county to work together, if you haven't mentioned something that you'd like to.
So I will say that a couple of years ago, there was legislation passed in Maryland General Assembly to establish a water governance task force to look at exactly this issue of what are the current barriers to the city and the county working more closely on issues of water governance and like how we deal with our pipe systems, and then establishing recommendations for strengthening that relationship and maybe doing things a different way. So I've heard rumors that maybe that governance task force is going to be coming back pretty soon to finalize their report. But I don't have any specific news to share about that yet. Hopefully soon.
Elizabeth asks on that note, do comments from county residents and organizations on the city consent decree carry the same weight?
I think anybody who has a vested interest in sewage issues in the Baltimore region should be commenting on this plan. And so I can't say for sure, like, who are they going to listen to the most? I will say that these comments are being solicited by Baltimore City on their plan. But the way that we have our action alert set up is that they are also automatically sent to Maryland Department of the Environment, because ultimately, like, they're the ones, they're in the driver's seat to decide whether or not this plan gets approved and accepted. And so, even if Baltimore City might be more likely to give more weight, I'm not saying this is accurate or true, but even if the city was more likely to give more weight to a city resident, ultimately the decision makers are state agencies.
And I would add, the sewage backups may be happening in Baltimore City, sewage overflows may be happening in Baltimore City neighborhoods, but all of the contaminants that come with them flow into the harbor and into the bay. And really, those belong to everyone. And that's why this is a Clean Water Act issue.
Absolutely.
Bear wants to know if you can list the other structured overflow sites. And that's, I'm realizing, something that we should put in future presentations.
Yeah, so not off the top of my head, because two of them are like well, they're not newer to me, but I don't know exactly where they are. Like I couldn't map them out. I can give you the numbers, but the best source to find information about those is probably modified consent decree quarterly reports. So on Baltimore City's sewage on Baltimore City's website, they are required as a result of our efforts to increase transparency and accountability through the negotiation process. They are required to publicly post the quarterly reports for the MCD, and that quarterly report lists out the existing structured overflows that they have identified. And so it's like 67 is across from the streetcar museum. 72 is like a little further down. It's underground. It's not daylighted. And then there's two other ones that I want to say are like 154 and 156 or something like that, which means nothing to anybody except for me. And then Baltimore County also has sewage overflows, which are structured overflows, which I believe can also be found in their quarterly reports. So maybe we can follow up after this with like a list of resources, if that would be helpful, and we can figure out exactly where they are.
Yeah, so we'll be sending this recording out along with a bunch of links to everyone who registered, whether they're here or not, and we can include more information about that as well. Angie asks, are new housing developments in the city and county regulated based on the storm and sewage, I'm guessing, burdens that they would present?
Yes. So in the county, there is a basic services map that has to be established and evaluated, which is dependent upon the collection system and wastewater treatment plant's ability to handle the amount of projected sewage that will be flowing into it. And so, unregulated development is not allowed because of the acknowledgement that like we have limited capacity in our sewer system and at our wastewater treatment plants. I think I'm not going to comment right now about how well that process works. So I will just like kind of leave that hanging. I will leave that a teaser. And maybe we can do another webinar on that soon.
Adam, Adam asks, and thanks for joining us, Adam from Waterfront Partnership. If I'm reading the phase 2 plan correctly, it sounds like the city's estimating that it would cost an extra $300 million to pursue a plan that would eliminate 100% of sewer overflows. That doesn't sound like that much money in the grand scheme of things. What else is behind the push to not reduce sewer overflows by 100%?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't have a good satisfying answer for that. And so I think, again, like this falls into the bucket of really great questions and comments that we should be asking and making on the phase 2 plan. Because again, at the end of the day, it's not just Baltimore City reading these questions and comments, it's the regulators as well. And so, yeah, I agree. Like we have already put several billion dollars into our sewer infrastructure, whether that's the collection system or the wastewater treatment plants. And so having additional funding to stop sewage overflows and keep people from getting sick is the type of thing that I want my tax dollars to go to. I'm just talking for myself personally. That's not like a blue water statement. But I think that these are the things that can meaningfully improve both water quality and quality of life for the people in this region. And that's the type of thing that we're advocating for. So thanks for the comment, Adam. And I completely agree.
We also have a question. Do you expect equal attention to be paid to updating the county consent decree? Can you speak at all to Blue Water's involvement there?
So Blue Water Baltimore has been watching the county consent decree. We are not a plaintiff intervener in the county consent decree simply because the county decree has never been modified. And so since 2005, the county has been under the same consent decree. And like I said earlier, the county also has lapsed deadlines in their consent decree. And so this is an issue that we've been watching. And I don't have any like specific updates that I can give at this point. In general, I'm much more familiar with the city's consent decree, so I can speak much more intelligently about the city consent decree. But we are watching the county, and everything that's happening in the county is directly impacting the city as well. I'll also say, like, a lot of times Blue Water, I think because of like where our office is and like where a lot of our work happens, sometimes people think that we're a city organization, but we're not. We're a watershed organization. And so anything that's happening throughout the entirety of the watershed, that's something that we're keeping eyes
on. There's a question from Tim that I would also invite Adam to chime in on about whether, and this is tangentially related, but storm water is a big part of this. Given that we've seen some legislative wins on reducing plastic packaging and plastic bags in Baltimore City, are we seeing less trash in our harbor?
So I can say just anecdotally, but then also I think this might be a great opportunity, like you said, Liana, for Adam, if he's willing, to talk about what they've been seeing at Mr. Trash Wheel. So just anecdotally, I can say that I've definitely seen fewer styrofoam containers in our waterways. And I think that that's attributable to the ban on expanded polystyrene foam that we were able to successfully advocate for in partnership with Baltimore Beyond Plastic several years ago. And I think there was other organizations too, so I'm really sorry I'm not intentionally missing or like leaving anybody out. I just have a bad memory. And I also definitely think that we have seen a reduction in plastic bags. So in our streams, oftentimes you can use plastic bags almost as like a high water mark for like where you can see them like stranded up in trees. And that is less prevalent these days than I've ever seen before. And then the last thing is that when we're out on the harbor, I see much less trash nowadays than I did before Mr. Trash Wheel was installed at the Jones Falls outlet. Like it's markedly different. And so that installation, that trash wheel, Mr. Trash Wheel, is doing an amazing job at capturing the trash that does come in. So I would love to hear kind of like what Waterfront Partnership has been seeing in terms of the content of what's in there.
Adam chimed in the chat, and I'll just lift that up, that he said that he's seen an 80% reduction in foam containers at Mr. Trash Wheel and about a 55% reduction in plastic bags, which is a newer ban. So huge thanks to everybody involved in that legislation, and also to the Waterfront Partnership for capturing so much of it among the many trash wheels.
Wow, that's fantastic. And such good proof that upstream legislation and upstream solutions are the answers to downstream problems. So that's really great news.
Yeah, and I'm so glad Adam joined us today. Lawrence also mentions about the county consent decree, that it would be important for the county to hold meetings like this as well. And can Blue Water Baltimore help to advocate for this? And yes, absolutely. Like Alice mentioned, we are a watershed-wide organization, and we are really pushing for a holistic approach to our regional stormwater and sewage systems. And so please keep an eye out. We will offer similar opportunities to comment. We'll offer similar explainers and connections to regulators and lawmakers in the county as well. We are getting close to the end of our time. If there are any other questions, though, we do have a few more minutes. Feel free to unmute also if you'd rather just say them out loud.
This is Beth Miller with Greenhouse Alliance. Would it be all right for me to include in the chat? We are asking for a public hearing in Baltimore County because the consent decree is being renegotiated. And, we would like DPWT and MDE to speak before the council about why the consent decree deadlines haven't been met and what needs to be corrected.
Hi, Beth. Yes, absolutely. Please do share that in the chat. I think more transparency is better for everybody. And so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And yes, please share it in chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge we are one organization, but we are also part of an ecosystem of organizations, including Waterfront Partnership, including Greenhouse Alliance, who are working on this. And so if you have related issues that you want to forward to us, I just put my email in the chat, but I'm behind communications@bluewaterbaltimore.org, and we would love to hear from you. So if there are things that we should know about that we can amplify or uplift, be a co-signer on, participate in, please don't hesitate to be in touch with us. Okay, we are going to end it here for the day. Please feel free to reach out if you have other questions. Look for an email with a recording that you can forward to others. And you can also find a link to that action alert at our website under the sewage section of our water quality issues. Hope you all have a great week. And don't forget, the deadline to comment is December 1st. So if you have a few minutes left in your lunch break or at the end of the day today, we encourage you to send a message.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.